I think we can get started. Bonjour, bienvenue à toutes et à tous.
Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you today for our series of conversations on Canadian bioethics.
It is my privilege to serve as president-elect of the Canadian Bioethics Society, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all to this session on ethics in geriatrics, which is part of the ongoing conversation series hosted by the Canadian Bioethics Society and generously sponsored by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. I'm delighted that we have a number of CBS members, members of our board, and representatives of our supporting organizations with us today who make up the stellar family that is the Canadian Bioethics Society. And welcome to those of you who are not yet members, but are with us out of interest for today's topic. We hope that you'll consider joining us, not only for the perks that come with membership, but for the amazing network and forum that the Society continues to cultivate. There are a few ways that you can join in on our conversation today. We're very pleased to have live simultaneous interpretation available for this session in both English and French. To hear everything in one particular language, please select that language from the interpretation icon at the bottom of your screen. If you can understand both languages, select off to hear everything in the original language spoken. We will be holding a discussion period at the end of both presentations. However, you may enter a question at any time using the Q&A function. So not the chat function, but the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You may enter your question in either French or English. Your name may be mentioned alongside your question, and if you don't wish your name to be mentioned, then please select the option to ask your question anonymously. Now, another way you can ask a question to our panelists is simply by using the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. We'll call on you by name, and then you can go ahead and ask your question aloud. If you choose to go this route, please keep your question brief and to the point. You can also share your thoughts about this session and suggest topics for future sessions by filling out our survey, which we very much encourage you to do, and the link will be posted in the chat in due time. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be available on the CBS website at www.bioethics.ca. La reconnaissance du territoire est en elle-même une
land acknowledgement is in itself a mark of tribute and respect towards Indigenous peoples. It attests to their presence, both historically and today. Acknowledgement and respect are essential to healthy reciprocal relations and to the continuation of the reconciliation process. I am speaking to you today from Laval University in Quebec City. In a spirit of friendship and solidarity, the university pays tribute to the First Nations of these lands. Being at the crossroads of the ancestral territories of the Abenaki people, the Atikamekw people, the Huron-Wendat people, the Innu people, and the Maliseet people, we honor our relationship with each other. Land acknowledgement should not simply be lip service before the so-called real business of the meeting. It is a way of reminding us that we are all called upon to work on reconciliation. It is a joint project, and we invite you to acknowledge the land and its keepers wherever you may be.
Just a few notes on our society. The Canadian Bioethics Society is an interdisciplinary and interprofessional community that provides a national forum for all of those who are invested or interested in the field of bioethics, especially as it unfolds here in Canada. A gathering place, as it were, for us to constructively engage the wide variety of bioethical issues from a host of different perspectives, backgrounds, and training, affecting the health and well-being of people here at home and abroad. Our members are healthcare professionals, academics, researchers, practicing ethicists, and ethics committee members, students, journalists, public policy experts, retirees, writers, and so many others who are committed to strengthening this cross-Canadian network. Some of the upcoming activities organized and enjoyed by our CBS members include this conversation series, that fosters dialogue and keeps us connected throughout the year outside of our conference and our workshop community forum. This next episode, or rather the next episode of the series, will take place on November 7th and will focus on issues in global bioethics, particularly global justice, with two wonderful speakers, Drs. Rioe Chung and Maxwell Smith. Be sure to mark your calendars. This will take place during what many of you know as National Health Ethics Week, that runs from November 5th to the 11th. During National Health Ethics Week, the CBS will also be giving a workshop on writing for mainstream media. So keep an eye out for more information about this event and how to attend. If you are planning on hosting an event open to the public during National Health Ethics Week, send us word so that we can help publicize through our social media channels, which are exceedingly active, as you well know. Notez également de vos agendas la 32e.
Also, mark your calendars for the 32nd annual conference of the Canadian Bioethics Society and the 18th annual International Conference on Clinical Ethics and Consultation, to be held jointly in Montreal from May 29th to 31st, 2024. The topic will be patient partnerships and community engagement. Registration and the call for proposals for papers for the joint conference are already open. So let's get started, and you can visit our website, www.bioethics.ca, to get the link.
The Canadian Bioethics Society is shepherded by an amazing board of directors and an amazing administrator, Mary Lou Scott-Smith, who is with us today. Individual members of the society are joined by an exquisite cast of supporting organizations from coast to coast who sustain the society in many ways and allow us to continue to exist as a registered charity and a nonprofit. In this conversation series, we want to show our gratitude to our supporting organizations. At each session, we have invited one of our supporting organizations to tell us a little about themselves. Today, we are highlighting the good work of Unity Health Toronto and are happy that we have with us Dr. Michael Sego, Senior Director of the Center for Clinical Ethics and Vice Chair of the Research Ethics Board at Unity Health Toronto, to say a few words. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks so much, Corey. And Unity Health is a proud supporter of the Canadian Bioethics Society, and I really appreciate the opportunity to say a few words about the center. We were founded in the 1980s, and if you just go to the next slide, you'll be able to see an already outdated picture of my team, although it was taken a few months ago. But we are a team of 9 ethicists, 4 fellows, and 1 admin assistant, and we're growing, which is exciting. Next slide. We're in a bunch of different healthcare environments, and we've certainly noticed a transition from acute care into long-term care and post-acute care. And so just to sort of highlight some of the areas we're involved, we've got amazing partner organizations, our founding organization, Unity Health Toronto. We're also in other acute care sites like Scarborough Health Network, St. Joe's Health System, both faith-based and secular organizations, as well as acute care and post-acute care. So we provide ethics services to all 10 long-term care homes administered by the City of Toronto, Baycrest, which is an academic teaching hospital specializing in geriatric care, as just some of those environments where we are providing ethics services. Next slide. And because we're kind of we've got a home, the CCE, but we're also in a variety of different organizations. All ethicists kind of have dual accountabilities, both to the center and to the specific institutions that they work for. We publish an annual community report to highlight some of the work that we do, and we just completed a strat plan for the next 3 years. And so we're sort of focusing on adapting our services to the new healthcare realities, advancing bioethics scholarship and fellowship training, and practicing and promoting the principles of EDI in the work that we do. Next slide. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to just highlight the fact that we've got a 2-year fellowship program that is recognized by the University of Toronto Faculty of Medicine. And we've got some amazing partner organizations. And so fellows that go through our program get to spend, up to 6 months rotations in different healthcare environments, such as a Center for Mental Health and Addictions, Sinai Health, Hospital for Sick Children, University Health Network, is just some examples of different institutions where they can learn about how ethics is done in those institutions, but still being a part of the fellowship program at the CCE. Next slide. And so for those of you who are interested or know somebody that might be interested, we usually post the fellowship ad in November for the 2024 to 2026 cycle. We're going to have an information session on December 6th from 7 to 8 p.m. for anybody that just sort of wants to kick the tires and see what this is all about. And I'm going to put a link in the chat just if you would like to pre-register for that. And applications are typically due in January 2024. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity to allow me to talk a little bit about the center, and I really look forward to hearing the talks today.
Goodness, thanks so much, Michael, on behalf of the CBS, for all of Unity Health Toronto's support over the years, and for your contributions to conversations in bioethics at the national level and international level, I suspect, as well. Thank you so very much for this. This was really eye-opening. Without further ado, it's a joy for me to introduce the moderator for our session today on ethics in geriatrics, Kim Jameson. Kim is an ethicist at Vancouver Coastal Health Authority and a member of the Clinical Research Ethics Board at the University of British Columbia. Kim holds a Master of Arts in Philosophy with a specialization in Applied Ethics and is undertaking her PhD at the University of British Columbia's W. Morris Young Center for Applied Ethics. Her dissertation research involves a qualitative study exploring people with Parkinson's disease, their family caregivers, and clinicians' perspectives of advanced care planning for end of life. It is very good to have you with us, Kim, and I turn it all over to you just now.
Oh, sorry, one moment. Here we go. Okay, can everyone hear me okay? Yes, okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Corey, for that warm introduction. And welcome, everyone. Bienvenue tout le monde. I am honored to be part of today's Conversations in Canadian Bioethics series, and very much look forward to an enriching dialogue and the opportunity to learn alongside you all. I'm grateful to be participating today from Vancouver, British Columbia, on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, which includes the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. As noted, today's session will focus on the topic of geriatrics and ethics, which is a subject matter of ever-increasing national importance, given our shifting demographics, with adults aged 85 years and older being the fastest growing population in Canada. So according to Statistics Canada, over the next 25 years, about by the year 2046, the population aged 85 and older is estimated to triple to almost 2.5 million people. In light of the predominantly biomedical model of our healthcare system, which tends to place an emphasis on curative treatment and acute illness for the individual patient, and less so a focus on chronic and/or comorbid conditions and palliative approaches to care of interdependent persons, as well as many of you can appreciate our persistent limitations in both physical and human resources needed to sufficiently meet increasing demand, and our reliance on informal and unpaid caregivers to bridge gaps in care provision. It is imperative we come together both as a society, but starting here today as a part of this wonderful group hosted by the CBS, and consider what constitutes best care and adapt practice environments to better serve the physical, psychosocial, and mental health needs of our growing older adult population. Which brings us to our two esteemed speakers with expertise in this topic area. We have with us today, pleasure to introduce Dr. Felix Pageau, who's a geriatrician and researcher and ethicist, as well as Dr. Janelle Taylor, who's a medical anthropologist. Each speaker will present for around 50 minutes and will offer some innovative approaches and very thoughtful reflections from their learnings within their respective fields of practice and terrific research that they've been doing over the years to help ground our discussion as we move into a facilitated Q&A session, where we will welcome your comments, insights, and questions for 30 or so minutes. So as a reminder, as already mentioned earlier, you can pose your questions in both the Q&A function, so not the chat, and I will read those out anonymously. But you also have the opportunity to raise your hand in the raise your hand function, and we will then unmute you to verbally make your comment or pose your question. So you have those two options. And then we will return back to our host, Corey, for the remaining 5 minutes together, who will offer some closing remarks. So I'm pleased to introduce you to our speaker. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Felix Pageau, who completed a master's degree in philosophy in 2019. And he's also a full researcher at the Center of Excellence in Aging in Quebec and at VTAM, Center for Research in Sustainable Health. Dr. Pageau is a member of the National Ethics Committee on Aging, CNEV, the Regroupement Québécois de Recherche sur Aging, RQRV, and the Quebec Palliative Care Research Network, RQSPAL. He is also responsible for the ethics and health axis of the Institute of Applied Ethics, or the IDEAS Lab, at Laval University. And this young doctor had the opportunity to study as a fellow at the prestigious McLean Center for Medical and Clinical Ethics in Chicago. His areas of study are in end-of-life care, futile care, dignity, autonomy, medical assistance in dying, euthanasia, consent to care, and robotics in geriatrics. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Pageau, and then we'll introduce and move over to Janelle, Dr. Janelle Taylor after. Thank you.
So hi, thank you, Kim, for this nice presentation. Je vais vous parler aujourd'hui en français. Ça a été la demande de la Société
I will
canadienne.
be speaking French.
So if ever you want to ask a question in English, please feel free to do so. Mais je vais surtout vous parler en français pour la suite.
But I will deliver my talk in English. So today I am introducing you to the topic of geriatrics, the elderly, and where is the current situation. So how to better take care of this elderly, seniors. So I'm a bioethicist as well as a physician, which is why I'm interested in providing appropriate care to seniors. So I'll give you the overall social context. Who are geriatric patients? Why is there isolation and loneliness? And how could we use robots to help alleviate isolation and loneliness? Ethical conundrums with respect to robots, and then, of course, care. As I said earlier, we're investing in studying the reversal of the age pyramid. There are fewer and fewer people to look after our elderly and our aging population, which means that more people are left looking after themselves when they are increasingly frail. There's also a greater risk of dementia, and it's linked to frailty, and I'll delve into this further, as well as the loss of self-reliance. So what's up, Doc? Who are our patients, our geriatric patients? So we're talking about 65 years of age or more. It's quite subjective and relative. 65 years rather. In the past, we used to say people were old if they were 70 years and older. In the era of Otto von Bismarck in Germany. So why did we pick 65? Well, we just picked it, it seems, and it's now the dividing line. That's when you are deemed old. Geriatric syndromes are common, which means that generally people need a professional. They need a specialist to manage their symptoms, including frailty, dementia, falls, polypharmacy, and multiple comorbidities. So frailty is based on many things. For instance, the decline, be it physical, psychological, multiple comorbidities, polypharmacy, the nutritional deficits or undernutrition, deconditioning or loss of fitness. When you improve your fitness, you become stronger. And of course, the reverse is also true. Deconditioning means loss of fitness and loss of strength. And there's also loss of functional autonomy. By adding all of these problems together and by having different scales, we can say that the person is more or less frail. So somebody who is green on all of these scales would have no frailty, and somebody who's in the red everywhere would be quite frail. There are many scales, but what's most comprehensive is the comprehensive geriatric assessment, as the name would indicate. It's a very long scale, and it requires in-depth knowledge. Here, I just wanted to show you how the comprehensive geriatric assessment is complex and comprehensive. It requires assessing what somebody does during an average day, activities of daily living, home living activities, leisure. So as you can see, you need an interdisciplinary team to look at all those things. You need many people to determine what, according to their values and their discipline, is happening with this patient. So that requires a very exhaustive assessment. We can talk about frailty scales further if you'd like, but we can also use scales that are shortened, but then we have less of a comprehensive picture. So what's dementia now? We all have an idea of what somebody who is what we used to call demented looks like, but somebody who has dementia is somebody who has a major neurocognitive disorder. So there's an effect on their memory. They have a hard time looking after their activities of daily living. And so that could be either patient reported or reported by somebody who is close to them. It has to be assessed by rigorous tests. And it must have an interference on home living activities such as medication, finances, etc., etc. So Alzheimer's is one of the diseases that we all know well, but there are other behavioral disorders. So you'll understand that people that are geriatric have special needs and often cognitive disorders, which means that they are prone to feeling isolated and lonely. So what is isolation? What's loneliness? Is it being alone or simply poorly accompanied or poorly supported? So isolation means somebody has few contacts. Loneliness is the feeling of being alone. So as you can see here, there's somebody that feels alone despite being in a group. If you look at the chess game, however, below, there's somebody who has fewer contacts and they feel probably isolated. So both things might not be directly related. You could feel isolated without being lonely and vice versa. Adverse effects, they've been demonstrated in literature, physical, psychological, psychiatric, cognitive problems, as well as mortality and a reduction of quality of life. So what is the solution? Could it be caregiving robots? In a systematic review in 2018, we showed that robots could, in fact, be used as treatment aids. So you've got robots that could look after some activities, and they might alleviate repetitive tasks so that caregivers would have more time to spend with patients. You may know Pageau, a small robot that looks like a child, and it seems to help with behavioral reactive behaviors associated with dementia. And there are others such as Matilda. We think that some robots could be helpful with home living activities, and they could help with companionship. They would replace the social aspect of human contact. And then there are robots as well that could help people manage their finances, manage their day-to-day on a cognitive level, and would act as such as custodians. In the literature, Sharkey and Sparrow say that often robots are used to relieve guilt. So we leave our seniors with robots and feel better about it. But that might not help with the feeling of isolation. It becomes more of a transactional relationship, but we can come back to this a little bit later on in the talk. Our Swiss-based team did a systematic review, and they said that the main benefits is constant monitoring. It promotes social interaction with robots. Currently, for instance, we are working on a virtual platform. We could see interaction with a robot in a similar fashion. Once people stay at home longer, then perhaps we'll have fewer issues, the issues we could have in institution. And so we feel that these robots could look after many things that would enable the elderly to stay home. Now, are they usable? Do we have a social license to use them? Because it does reduce interaction with people, and it's also a very costly technology. Is it even affordable? In a paper we published with Nadine Salver, who's a PhD student, we said that dignity, or the loss of dignity, could be alleviated by the use of robots. For instance, if you can't look after going to the washroom yourself, perhaps you prefer to do it with a robot. So if we want somebody to feel safe at home, we have all sorts of mechanisms that can impact their autonomy because we want them to feel safer. But is that a dignified way of living? What is the dignity of risk? Which leads me to Care Ethics by Joan Tronto. Mentions 4 moments. So I've got somebody in front of me who's suffering, who has a problem, and I want to care for them. I'm planning care for them as I can. I provide the care, and then I check if I provided the care appropriately. So it's about centering care on the individual, on their life project, on their care goals, and based on the dignity of risk. So from the point of view of the individual, are they willing to take this risk? And that's what I had to say on the topic.
Thank you so much, Felix. That was wonderful, thought-provoking talk. I am going to now introduce our next speaker before we get into the Q&A portion of our discussion together. So we have with us Dr. Janelle Taylor, a medical anthropologist on faculty in the Department of Anthropology at the University of Toronto. She is trained as a cultural anthropologist and has researched social and cultural dimensions of medical practice, medical technology, and medical education in North America. Recently, most of her energies have been devoted to research about aging, dementia, caregiving, and decision-making around chronic conditions, especially kidney disease. Much of this work has been carried out collaboratively with physician colleagues, and the resulting articles have appeared in medical as well as social science journals. So welcome, Janelle, and I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, bonjour. I'm just going to try and share my screen. There we go. slideshow from beginning. Okay, sorry. Great. So I'm very happy to be here and thank you for the invitation. And I wanted to start as the the outsider. I'm an anthropologist. I'm not trained in ethics, and I wanted to kind of give you a sense of where I'm coming from and how I see the ways that my training, the kinds of questions that I tend to ask and try to answer in my own work intersect with questions of ethics and medical ethics. So I have up here a very simple diagram, which kind of reflects how I have learned over many years of these collaborations to think about some of the differences between medicine and anthropology. And I'll say I realize that this is an oversimplification, so I ask you to forgive me. It's just a thought, kind of a tool for thinking about these things. So in general, medicine, as we know, tends to look to individual bodies and to biology for explanations of sources of health problems, and also tends to target solutions at that level as well. And it's a very practical endeavor. You are faced with someone who's suffering. There is a necessity, a demand to respond in a practical way to that suffering. Anthropology tends to look to social and cultural context as the way to produce understanding, and it is at a remove from those practical problems. We tend to have the luxury to reflect on problems without being necessarily able or required to respond to them with the same urgency. So the difference between the two, the way I think about it, is that medicine tends to try to eliminate possible causes, if you think differential diagnosis, how that works, whereas anthropology tends to accumulate possible contexts, right? You want to think about the context of the individual person and their health problems in terms of their family, in terms of their community, in terms of history, social, arrangements, economic policies, all of these things. So those two approaches aren't necessarily reducible to each other. But I think that the tension between them is very productive. And that's been my experience in the collaborative projects that I've been involved in over the years. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the research that I've done just very briefly. And of course, I can answer questions later if you're interested. When I started out as my career, I began, as I often tend to do, by being puzzled by something in the world and trying to dig into it to find a context that would help me make sense of it. And this, what you see on the screen there, it's an image of an ad that showed up in a magazine in the early 1990s that featured an image, a sonogram image of a fetus, and over the phrase, "Is something inside telling you to buy a Volvo?" So this was using medical imagery of a fetus to sell cars. And I found it really kind of weird and puzzling, and it became for me the entry point for trying to figure out what the heck is going on here. And long story short, I ended up doing research that involved trying to look at how the medical uses of ultrasound as part of obstetrical care related to the ways that the same technology and the same images were used outside the medical context in things like this advertisement, in also abortion polemics in the US. And what I ended up coming to was a sense that the assumption that there is a kind of very fixed pro-life position where the fetus is understood as a person versus a very fixed pro-choice position where the fetus is not understood as a person, was actually a simplified version of a reality that was much more complicated. And as I argued in a book that I wrote about this, that we really have to look to consumer culture to understand how personhood and commodities are all tangled up together around these medical technologies and their uses and the ways that they get mobilized culturally. So that's an instance of trying to take something, an ethical debate that's become very rigid, and try to put it into a different kind of context. I then moved to Seattle, where I taught for 20 years before moving to Toronto in 2019. And in the early 2000s, I became involved in a health research team headed up by Dr. Elizabeth Vig, who is a palliative care physician at the University of Washington and at the Seattle Area Veterans Affairs Agency. So what she was doing was she was interested in understanding surrogate decision-making. The basic situation being that there was, then still is, a lot of effort put into encouraging people facing serious illness, especially people who are older and facing serious conditions, to engage in advanced care planning, right? To think about, what if you couldn't speak for yourself, what would be your wishes, to document those and to communicate those to your family, with the goal of being able to act on those and to, implement care that would be concordant with the wishes of the patient if such an event should occur. And so there had been a lot of effort already getting people to document who they would want to be their surrogate decision makers and so forth. But what Dr. Vig understood was that nobody had really stopped to ask people who had been put in the position of surrogate decision makers what that was like for them and how they actually made the decisions that they were called upon to make. And so this project interviewed people who had been in that position about, well, what was it like? What made it hard? What made it easier? How did you actually think you knew what you should do? What did you do? And it was very interesting, because what it revealed is that this solution, this kind of appointment of a surrogate decision maker, was premised on the expectation that people would act based on substituted judgment. But actually, people act based on many, many other forms of reasoning. And so the ethical solution, or the solution to the ethical problem, was actually a lot more complicated than anticipated. So that was one kind of project. I also then, in the mid-2000s, this is a photo of, it's a photo of my mother holding my daughter. This was taken many, many years ago. And the reason I put it up there, two reasons. One is that this is actually how I ended up researching dementia, was that it landed in my life as the daughter of someone who was living with very advanced dementia. And when my father died, I was thrown right into that and learned things along the way that I ended up reflecting on and pursuing research about. The other reason I like to put that picture is just because it frames someone, in this case my mother, someone with dementia, as being in a relationship with other people where they're not simply a recipient of care, but it's more complex than that. And one of the things that I ended up being interested in thinking about dementia was questions of recognition. And what I mean by that, I was puzzled by the way that people around me were always asking me, does she recognize you? Does she recognize you? Like this question again and again and again made me think that actually there's something weird and wrong about that question, that actually the question is, do we recognize her, right? Is someone with dementia granted recognition as a person, as a friend, as a, you know, as even being alive? And so this got me thinking about sort of how individual lives are shaped by these broader discourses. I then pursued research in collaboration with some geriatrician colleagues at the University of Washington, trying to document our hunch that people with dementia were excluded from research studies, even in the field of geriatrics. So we published a piece. We spent a lot of time reading 400 and some articles in 2 issues of the Journal of the American Geriatrics Society. Basically, every article in those 2 issues that had recruited people to see how they had done so. And what we documented was that there was a widespread, mostly unacknowledged and unjustified pattern of excluding people with dementia and cognitive impairment, even from research in geriatrics. So, which has obviously clinical as well as scientific consequences, given the population of people that geriatricians work with. So that's one instance where I think part of what might have led to this pattern of exclusion might have been the concern that researchers have that to include people with dementia is just too difficult, it's too costly, it's too slow. So if there's a very narrow sort of framing of ethics that is informing how people engage in research, it may actually have unethical consequences on the broader scale of leading to this kind of pattern of exclusion. I then also got interested in friendship and thinking about broader contexts, right? How is it that that people who aren't necessarily those unpaid family members who get, drawn in to provide care for people with dementia, but who are part of that a little bit more distant social world of friends, coworkers, neighbors, etc., how do they respond when someone develops dementia? And one data point that informed this question on my part was my experience of seeing that my mother's friends mostly disappeared, in the sense they didn't keep up contact, but one did, and through to the very end remained present. And so I was interested in finding and learning from people who had found ways and reasons to keep up a friendship after the onset of dementia, and to learn from them lessons that could be shared with other people about what friendship can mean and about how it can be practiced in this situation. And one of the things that that I came to think about in the context of that work was the ways that people who spoke to me as self-identified friends of someone with dementia, how they described friendship as a form of moral experiment, where they were basically experimenting with their own lives and social relationships, trying to sustain a valued sense of themselves as people who had certain qualities and certain kinds of relationships. Again, I can talk more about that. And then I got into this research that I've been involved in most recently about older adults with dementia who didn't have close family when they developed dementia, what they call kinless older adults. I can talk more about how we went about that. It's complicated to just document people in this situation, but some of the insights that came out of this, one is that there really are a variety of life trajectories that can lead people to be in that situation. So anyone can end up being kinless. And the fact that I, for example, am married, have children, doesn't mean that I couldn't also end up in this situation, because if you live long enough, you may outlive people. And there were people in our sample who did outlive both spouses and children. We also came to the conclusion that because of this, the healthcare system really needs to engage with the social networks that people do have, without assuming that it's necessarily family members, need to be alert to and try to maintain lines of communications with whoever is important in people's lives. And it might be neighbors, coworkers, fellow volunteers, church members. There were a range of different relations we found. Other things we found that half of the kinless older adults with dementia lived alone at the time that their dementia set in. So this is concerning. I mean, living alone with dementia is not easy, and people without any close relatives may be more vulnerable to going without care that they need, whether you're talking about everyday support, companionship, or even medical care. So we conclude that basically a comprehensive social approach to elder care is needed, which is going to surprise absolutely no one in this group. But this is one of the things that we found we could argue based on our research. And we felt that it was important also to bring attention to this mostly invisible and potentially very vulnerable population. So in terms of suggestions for ethics in geriatrics, I think what I would say, based on not just my own work, but my sense of medical anthropology more broadly, and both the productive collaborations and the tensions between medical anthropology and medical ethics, is first to beware of the tendency to default to explanations and solutions that are always pitched at the level of the individual and the family, that those can have unintended consequences. Second is that we need to seek out the voices and the experiences of the people who are living with the problems and living with the solutions. Many of the proposed solutions to ethical dilemmas can, of course, themselves become social realities that are complicated and entail their own new ethical quandaries. So for that reason, we need to also examine and consider the broader social, cultural, and political contexts that contribute to the bedside ethical dilemmas, right? So I think there's, again, coming back to that very first diagram, there's always this tension between what should we do, and which is, of course, the main question of medical practitioners confronted with suffering, and it's complicated, which is the thing that anthropologists tend to document and to show. Each one of those is, I think, better put in conversation with the other. It's better when thinking about what to do to acknowledge the complications, and it's better when reflecting on the complications to have some responsibility to address the need for practical action. So that's it, and thank you. Merci.
Thank you so much, Janelle. That was, again, a wonderful talk. And certainly, I know you say you're not a trained ethicist. I think you certainly sound like an ethicist, especially that last comment there. It's complicated. I feel like, I don't know, but those of you on the line here as practicing ethicists, feels like that's a common response we give as well, but also just the kinds of considerations that you're taking in terms of that social, more holistic picture of the patient or the individual in care. Certainly sounds like the role of an ethicist in some of the work you are doing. So I just want to take a pause and again make sure that everyone who maybe was later to join is aware of the ability to both pose questions in the Q&A. I see we do have at least one question in the chat, which I will get to in a moment. And you're also welcome to raise your hand if anyone would like to speak verbally. So I'm just going to take a quick pause to see if there's anyone with a hand raised, or I see some comments coming in. Oh, no, that's not from a question. Any verbal comments at this time? Okay, I will get to the one comment in the chat in a moment. I just thought for a minute though, just to kind of jump into what the key recommendations coming up from Janelle's presentation. If Felix, if you wanted to offer any reflections from your role, either with the clinician hat and or ethicist hat you wear, in terms of talking about perhaps how you might support either in the ethics consultation or in a clinical role, those folks coming in, the kinless older adults or those without that social network, and taking into consideration sort of how you might approach supporting them through treatment or care planning decision making, and trying to get at that more social context and solutions, perhaps less so again at that individual family level if they are not themselves able again to participate or to some degree participate in the decision-making process. So is there anything you would like to follow up with Dr. Pageau on what Janelle has made recommendations around?
Well, this is a tough question. In the clinical setting, it's always hard when people don't have any family or loved one we can reach to. Maybe I can continue in French, sorry. I switched to English mode. Mais en clinique, c'est évidemment la famille.
In a clinical setting, family, especially with cognitive disorders, it is important for us to know what the person or how the person was and what his or her life history is. And then when we can't reach a family, we have social workers in order to find out about the patient, the person. So what we ask our team is to find someone. Either we do it as geriatricians, or well, it could be very technical from a legal point of view. In Quebec, we have steps. Is there a spouse? Are there any children? Are there any close ones? And sometimes we talk to neighbors or long-term friends, people who in some way know the person. For those patients who are isolated and about whom we have very little information. And sometimes we reach out to health professionals who have known the patient for a while, people who are completely isolated or who are admitted in our department. That's quite rare, but it happens. So it's very difficult in order to make decisions, and power of decisions is difficult. So for patients who do not have a family, but sometimes we always manage to reach out to someone, to find someone, because this is a need that we have. We do everything we can to find someone, and very often it's the medical team that bases its work on its values to try and find decisions for the person.
Thank you, Felix. It sounds like a similar process here in BC. We do have legislation in place for a temporary substitute decision maker that quite recently, I think it was maybe 2011 or so, that the legislation changed to actually expand the notion of family to include not only the kin, legal kin, but those in the more broader social network, neighbors and other friends, as part of the definition of what constitutes a family. And similarly, as you note, the reliance on other interprofessional team members, and especially the social workers, to help navigate and really explore that wider social network, and really ensure that we have the right voices and perspectives around the table to be able to speak and honor what those values and life histories have been if that person is unable in the moment to participate in the same way. Janelle, did you want to add anything at this stage or in response?
Well, I will say that, well, first of all, I should explain that the research that we were doing was based on materials from the Seattle area, so in the US. And of course, it's a different system, different healthcare, different issues. One of the things that we were doing was working to figure out who was present in the lives and providing support for these older adults who had dementia, who didn't have close family. And of course, we found some, we found, okay, there's some neighbors, coworkers, etc. And actually, it was Elizabeth Vig, this collaborator who I have continued to work with over all these years, who pointed out, she said, well, you should be thoughtful of the fact that if you point out to the health system that there are these other people, the health system is going to say, aha, you get to be the caregiver. When actually a lot of the involvements of some of these neighbors and other people who are not family, they tended to be more limited. And they tended to be, sometimes on a emergency basis, getting involved as a form of rescue. And so it seemed to us unlikely that these connections would be willing or able to stand up to bearing the full brunt of the responsibilities for care that often get placed on family members. And so we wanted to be sure to point that out. And I think also, by the same token, we can't expect clinicians, like frontline clinicians, to solve all these things. That's another way of kind of individualizing a problem that's much broader. So, this is part of the context for recommending that actually there's a comprehensive systemic approach needed, right? A structural problem requires a structural solution. And, if there isn't a more comprehensive social solution to offering care to people who are without family, then that is a big problem, and it's a political problem as well as an ethical problem.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, thank you for that. So we do have a number of questions